Up next on The Reveal.
You can suck my dick.
A Metro Atlanta police officer loses his patience. What happens next is just as surprising. This Georgia grandmother nearly loses her freedom.
Next to losing my son, the most horrible thing I've experienced in my life.
Was it a case of voter intimidation? He survived the battlefield without a scratch, but he returned home as a changed man.
He was very explosive. His temper was outrageous.
One veteran's hidden scars and how his story may impact many more. The Reveal begins now with investigators Faith Abube and Brendan Keefe.
Welcome to The Reveal, a show dedicated to life-changing investigations. Police body cameras are providing real proof of the kind of citizen complaints we've heard about for decades.
Yeah, but Faith, this is one we hadn't heard before. A Griffin police officer asking another man to perform oral sex on him as an insult. And that is just the beginning of the story.
Yeah, you gotta have it signed by a judge. Right.
It starts as a routine police call to help with a custody dispute.
George is up like that.
It will end with one of these officers losing his job.
What's your first name?
Please. Y'all know information now because I don't want to get in trouble.
All right. Go. You can suck my dick.
No, what? No, come on, please.
Ma'am, sit down.
But she lives here, please.
Sit down. You have me come out here to help you.
And you said to suck your dick like
suck your dick is your information.
Yeah. I'm out here trying to help you as best I can.
Yes.
And then there's like, oh, never
we're trying
mind.
to get the child back, and you said suck your dick.
He told us to leave. He didn't
No,
tell us
he
not
didn't.
to leave.
No, he didn't.
He told me to suck his dick.
He was wearing a Griffin police uniform.
Yes.
He was wearing a Griffin police badge.
Yes.
And he asked you to perform oral sex on him.
Yes.
As a euphemism.
Yes.
You can suck my dick.
Officer Travis Wick turns to leave, but then re-engages the citizen.
I'm just gonna
But you
leave.
said to suck your dick.
I'm just gonna leave.
Respectful is
And
that? How
I'm
respectful?
gonna leave.
It's on camera.
I'm gonna leave.
Don't worry about it.
I'm gonna leave, and we'll have a supervisor come over, okay?
Bring somebody more respectful back because we're trying to get a child back, and you ask us to suck your dick.
No, I didn't ask you.
Yeah, you did.
No, I didn't.
Yes, you did.
I asked him to.
Yes, you did. Get out of here.
My friend Amber said something about, you told me to do this, and he even said, no, I didn't tell you to do it, I told him to do it.
And you ask us to suck your dick.
No, I didn't ask you.
Yeah, you did.
No, I didn't.
Yes, you did.
I asked him to.
While a sergeant responds to the scene, Officer Wick calls his lieutenant on the drive back to police headquarters.
And he's like, well, just never mind. I'm not going to give you my information. And I told him, I said, well, you can suck my dick. And they flipped out. I f***ed up. My camera was on, yes.
Then calms down with a smoke in his patrol car. The police report shows the citizens seem to become irritated that the police couldn't help them. There is no mention in the official report of what really escalated the situation.
You can suck my dick.
To lose it over something so simple, what would happen if it was a major incident?
Police Chief Mike Yates had the same concerns.
And I've got to be able to defend you and defend the department if things really go to shit. And with that pattern of behavior in this latest incident, I can't. How can I do that?
I just said it. I don't know why. I don't. I mean, that's it, Chief. It was f***ing stupid, man.
Yeah.
I apologize, Chief. I don't know why that happened. I don't know what set me off. And
is that what we're gonna tell? Is that what we're gonna tell the grand jury?
Or 2, 5, and 11.
Please don't fire me, Chief. Please don't fire me. I'm a good officer, Chief.
You got great potential, or I wouldn't have fooled around with you and tried to help you last time.
Personnel records show Wick resigned from the Locust Grove police force in 2008 after he called in sick because he was drinking, then showed up to court the next day smelling like alcohol. Internal memos show Wick blew a .036 before his scheduled testimony before the judge and was told to turn in his badge and gun.
If that was a one-time thing and it just popped out of nowhere because you was having a bad day and your dog died and whatever, that's one thing. But on the tail end of you being hired after you got fired in Locust Grove,
Chad called me last night and offered me a steak dinner to drop the charges.
Ora Hosky told police a friend of Officer Wick asked him to drop the complaint.
I'm an off-duty police officer. Who you work for? City of Griffin.
This is the friend. Officer Chad Moxon stopped in 2015 for riding his motorcycle through Pike County at 95 miles per hour.
He said you told him you had been drinking a little bit.
I've been drinking tonight. Okay.
The off-duty Griffin officer admitted drinking 4 beers in 30 minutes before the ride and was arrested for drunk driving.
I know that you know it as good as I do. We'll work on it. Okay.
The DUI was reduced to reckless driving. Officer Moxon resigned from Griffin, and his police certification is currently on probation.
What is your name?
Chad Moxon. I'm actually a police officer for City of Griffin.
Oh, Chad. Chad, can you give me a description on the person that charged you?
The state also put Moxon's police credentials on probation for this 2012 incident and 911 call.
I just got shot in the side.
He was shot off-duty. Police records show it was a fist fight with a woman's boyfriend, but Moxon described it differently to 911.
He just kicked the door into the house and come in and attacked me. And then when I took off out the other door, he shot me.
Indictments for false statements were thrown out, and an exonerated Moxon stayed a Griffin officer until 2015 after that DUI arrest.
Basically, he was offering to take me out to dinner. He wanted to take me and Travis out to dinner and buy us both a steak dinner so we can try to resolve this. He asked me if I would go down to the police department today and drop the complaint.
You can suck my d.
Now, Faith, Ora Hosky refused to drop the complaint, and Officer Wick, after begging the chief for his job, turned in his resignation.
What about the officer's friend in the steak dinner? What does he have to say about all
Well,
this?
at first, Chad Moxon denied knowing anything about the case, then said he did offer to buy a steak dinner, but not to get Ora Hosky to drop the complaint, just so the complainant and the officer could get to know each other. Right now, Officer Moxon is with the Roberta Police Department.
Coming up on The Reveal, claims of voter suppression. Is a grandmother's felony charges an attempt to intimidate minority voters?
Next to losing my son, the most horrible thing I've experienced in my life.
If you have a news tip or a comment on one of our investigations, email us at thereveal@11alive.com. Right now, the Georgia Secretary of State's office is facing several federal lawsuits accusing Georgia of suppressing minority voters. Here's one recent claim in a small town outside Atlanta where a grandmother almost went to prison.
I know you before you started.
We go back a long way. We were next door neighbors.
She's not on this year's ballot, but it's easy to see why Olivia Coley Pearson has served 19 years on Douglas City Council, unopposed.
So we all go way back.
She knows her constituents.
Thank you, sweetie.
While popular in her district, she can be a lightning rod on city council, especially on race issues.
And I tell you, the citizens of Douglas needs to demand your resignation.
Sometimes they want you to sit and be quiet and make people think that we have the perfect city.
If you're not going to uphold the seats that you're holding, you don't need them.
And I'm not liked for that.
Coley Pearson's toughest political battle happened last year, not on city council.
You committed false swearing, did you?
No, sir.
But in a Coffee County courtroom facing felony charges.
I will not agree.
It started with a complaint filed with the Georgia Secretary of State's office. The claim, illegally assisting voters in 2012. Listen to an audio recording between a state investigator and a voter Coley Pearson helped.
Do you know why Miss Pearson signed the back of the voter certificate that she was assisting you?
Because I didn't know what to do, what I ought to do.
Was that the first time using the machine?
Yeah, that was my first time.
Okay, did she give you any suggestions of who to vote for? At the end there where you have to push the button to cast your ballot, who pushed that?
Me.
And that's what happened. That's what I was criminally charged for in terms of assisting a voter.
Were you on the ballot?
No.
While the Secretary of State's office declined to move forward with the charges,
But there are corrupt politicians who abuse their power.
Coffee County's district attorney did. Coley Pearson's trial ended with a hung jury. Afterwards, one of the jurors told the Southern Center for Human Rights the only reason Pearson received the not guilty verdict because one of those people got on the jury, later clarifying those people meant blacks.
Really? One of those people got on the jury.
Did you know about this?
No, No.
Because the jury deadlocked, the DA's office pursued the charges again. This time, the judge moved the trial to a different county. It took the new jury just 20 minutes to find her not guilty, allowing Coley Pearson to exhale.
It has been so traumatic. The most, next to losing my son, the most horrible thing I've experienced in my life.
Here we go again.
Reverend Rudolph Porter is a local pastor. He and other black community leaders believe the trial was intended to intimidate minority voters.
But if she could have gone to prison for that, I guarantee you could serve all the hot dogs, the hamburgers, the Coca-Colas in the world. People wouldn't have gone to the polls ever again in this county if she would have been found guilty.
They would have been that afraid to go.
Absolutely. In fact, I would have started voting absentee.
Isn't it true that you think everyone who disagrees with you is a racist hater?
The district attorney declined interview requests, but in a letter said the accusation that Mrs. Pearson was somehow targeted or that the prosecution was racially motivated runs completely contrary to the facts. The letter highlighted the race of the other individuals indicted at the same time as Pearson for the same crime. 2 black, 2 white. Pearson was the only one to fight the charges. While voter fraud is rarely prosecuted, claims of voter suppression and intimidation are widespread. Some voting rights groups call Georgia ground zero for the problem.
I believe that Georgia is probably one of the worst states in this country when it comes to protecting the sacred and fundamental right to vote.
Sean Young is an attorney for the American Civil Liberties Union of Georgia. Over the past 2 years, the organization has filed about 19 lawsuits and demand letters to block mass voter purges, attempts to shut down polling locations in minority communities, and prevent what it claims are unnecessary hurdles to register to vote. Many of those actions against the Georgia Secretary of State's office.
And it's this kind of like death by 1,000 cuts approach that these politicians, elections officials engage in that undermines faith in our democracy.
Brian Kemp is Georgia's Secretary of State and candidate for governor. Do you think minority voters in Georgia have legitimate concerns?
No, I do not. Minority voters really should be excited about what's going on in Georgia. Really, all Georgia voters and potential Georgia voters in the future should be excited about the level of accessibility that we now have in the Secretary of State's office that didn't exist before I got there.
Andy, what is Secretary of State Kemp doing to improve access to the vote, to the polls?
Kemp points out to creating online voter registration during his tenure as Secretary of State, and he says it has increased minority voter registration by 23%.
And activists have said that Georgia's strict voting laws play a part in voter suppression. So how do we compare to other states?
Georgia is one of only 3 states in the country which requires proof of citizenship to register. The ACLU says that presents an unnecessary burden for communities of color, which often don't have all the documentation they need.
Coming up on The Reveal.
His life was really just beginning. Makes my heart race every time I come here.
A mother speaks out after her son, a war veteran, dies from a traumatic brain injury years after coming home from war. When we think of CTE brain disease, we usually think of football players taking hits on the field. But there are other men and women in different uniforms facing the same potentially deadly danger.
We're talking about the men and women in the military. Tonight, one mother shares the emotional story of her son to help other veterans and protect them from an invisible threat.
I love him, and I'm so sorry that I didn't know.
A gunner often tasked with convoy duty, Sergeant Ash's records show he was within 30 yards of 12 IED blasts, but managed to make it through 3 tours of duty without a scratch. But all was not right.
He changed. He changed a lot.
Once sensitive and thoughtful,
He was very explosive. His temper was outrageous, and his behavior was bad.
the VA diagnosed Kevin with the usual suspects: PTSD, anxiety, depression. But denied he had a traumatic brain injury.
Nope, they never would diagnose that.
Then in the fall of 2013, while playing rugby, Kevin collapsed after a routine tackle and fell into a coma for a month. Over the next 3 years, he was unable to care for himself, battling cognitive dysfunction, memory loss, even blindness.
And ultimately, he passed away in hospice care at the Minneapolis VA.
Joy wanted answers that doctors couldn't seem to give. So, acting on a hunch, she donated Kevin's brain to Boston University, the same center that's research has documented serious brain injury and disease in football players subjected to years of big hits. BU called Joy with their findings.
And at the end I said, so did he have CTE or not? And she said, oh yeah, he had CTE.
That evidence of CTE, chronic traumatic encephalopathy caused by substantial blast-related brain injuries, is significant. Dr. Lee Goldstein is director of BU's neurotrauma laboratory.
The numbers of these military servicemen and women who've had these exposures are staggeringly large. I mean, this is not a small problem.
He says one blast exposure causes numerous brain injuries and fears the risks may be even higher if repeated blasts come close together.
You know, if you have one of those where you really have multiple injuries all at once, and you have another one, a week or two later, not good. Not good. Not good at all.
Dr. Goldstein says just like football, needing to limit blows to players' heads, Kevin's case clearly shows the military needs to better track and limit a soldier's repeated exposure to blasts, even if it means pulling a healthy-looking soldier out of the field.
This is real. It has real consequences, and we need to take this issue very seriously. Because otherwise people get worse and they die.
It's that knowledge that Kevin's final act of service could provide information that saves other soldiers that has his mom vowing to tell his story to all who listen.
He always was the one to lead the way, so he has one more chance to do that.
There's been a lot of reaction to the story, so tonight, investigator AJ Legault has an update.
Joy tells us her mission is to help her son's legacy of service live on through the search for earlier diagnosis and treatments of CTE. She's partnered with the Concussion Legacy Foundation to raise awareness and encourage other military members to pledge their brain to accelerate military CTE research. We've put links on how you can do that on 11alive.com. For The Reveal, I'm AJ Legault reporting.
If you have a news tip or a comment on one of our investigations, email us at thereveal@11alive.com.
Next week on The Reveal.
The threats of a possible mass murder.
Investigators found an explosive device.
This would have been a Columbine-type incident.
The teenagers walking the halls at Etowah High School never knew there was a deadly threat to attack until police made an arrest.
We have more policemen out at the school watching.
From police to cameras and panic buttons, schools have increased security to stop the next school shooter. But this woman believes there's a way to prevent a student from ever becoming one.
Do you hear about some of these things in the news and think, how do I make sure that doesn't happen at our school?
Every time.
The resource, underfunded and misunderstood, that could save lives.
Next week on The Reveal.
You've been watching The Reveal, a show fueled by investigations that make an impact.
We'll see you next week on The Reveal.